Sometimes, exploring means ongoing evaluation. I'm author and researcher Mike Luoma. I've been looking into the copious amount of stonework found on the hills and ridges around Gates Pond in Berlin, Massachusetts, for a few years. Stone rows, perched boulders, and other possibly placed oddly shaped rocks and stones, as well as potential stone prayers and other stone assemblages, many of which display signs of being possibly originally older indigenous stonework. Town histories and guides say this area was known to local indigenous folks as Kequasagansett, place of great, as in large, stones, or great place of stones. Works either way, given all the stonework here spread out around the pond. And given the huge stones here like the giant glacial erratic on a hill south of the pond, known as King Philip Rock. Kequasagansett. Places nearby now hold the names of the first European settlers, although neither Stephen Gates of Lancaster nor his heirs were thought to have lived here at the pond. They divided up the land and sold it to Robert Fosgate, Josiah Sawyer, and others. Sawyer Hill runs along the north and western sides of Gates Pond, and Fosgate Brook extends off to the east, disappearing into culverts beneath I-495, whose 6 lanes now run through the former Fosgate farm. Back in 1901, the Fosgates had to sue the town of Hudson to restore their water flow, after Hudson took over the pond for the town's water supply, and improvements to the pond cut off the Fosgates' water. The town turned swamp around the start of the brook into part of the pond, enlarging it. Compare a newer map to an old one, and you can see the expanded area. The woodland path around the north and eastern side of the pond passes the stone berms and crosses the stone-lined old Fosgate Brook the town of Hudson was forced to restore. According to the Reverend William A. Houghton, in his History of Berlin, Massachusetts, 1784 to 1895, published in 1895, describing the area before the town took over the pond. This beautiful lake of pure, cold, crystal water, fed by springs, is the favorite resort of pleasure seekers and picnic parties in the summer season. The eastern shore is studded with cottages and houses for entertainment. On the western acclivity is Lakeside, so named by Madame Ruderstoff, the famous singer, who lived there a few years ago. They say there was a dance hall here. Must have been quite the place in the mid-19th century. But in 1883, Hudson petitioned the Massachusetts legislature for eminent domain to take the pond as its water supply, which it did. Even today, Gates Pond remains an auxiliary supply for the town. At the advice of the state's Board of Health, Hudson eventually razed all buildings on the land surrounding the pond. Despite its name, Kequasagansett, the town of Berlin is another of those places which insists that, though indigenous folks passed through the area, they didn't live in what's now Berlin. That 19th century historian Reverend Houghton wrote, "Clamshell Pond in Clinton, as also Gates Pond, was nearly in a direct line between the Okukangансets in Marlborough and the Nashaways at Washakon. Hence the trail leading from one place to the other would necessarily pass through this town and by these ponds. There's more of this deeper background in my 10-part series on Substack, Rediscovering Kequasagansett, from late 2021 and early 2022, which includes my realization that my route from my childhood home in Hudson to where I now live in Burlington, Vermont, was likely the same path taken when Indians from the vicinity of Montreal, quote-unquote, kidnapped one of Josiah Sawyer's descendants in 1705. I'd been walking along the Winooski River in Burlington shortly before visiting Massachusetts and Gates Pond. I later found myself looking at an old map of what's now northern Vermont, which called the Winooski the French River, with the note, "This way captives have been carried." People whose names are now hills and roads were abducted along the hills and roads I now travel between Vermont and Massachusetts. There's some odd resonance in that. While I have been writing and posting on Kequasagansett, it's been a while since there's been a video update, almost 4 years since the one on King Philip Rock. And there was only one on my first visit here before that. There's a little catching up to do, and a lot of stonework to be seen. Thanks to the farming, the recreation, and the work done by the town of Hudson around the pond to improve their waterworks, it's not always possible to know what might be older stonework around Gates Pond. In 2021 and 2022, I looked into the stonework surrounding the waterworks north of the pond and on the northernmost rise of Sawyer Hill, just beyond. There are potential stone prayers on the southwest side of the rise, and stone rows which run up and over the rise, as well as around the hill. And these stone rows often display possible indigenous stonework designs. This is my 2025 update of the notebook sketch of what I look for in the stones. And I've covered these in many other videos. I found designs like these in many of the stone rows around Gates Pond, here in Kequasagansett. There is curious stonework around the waterworks, including an old stone well. It was hard to spot. I spied it among the embankments and berms. Did settlers build this, or could it be even older? This small U-shaped structure sits on the edge of the waterworks. It is possible this was some sort of ritual stonework. This stone row rose up out of the Waterworks and headed north towards the rise, breaking at this gateway for a time. This would appear to be a serpent head boulder in this stone row. There are niches or windows in this stone row. Also interesting to see a wing-shaped stone alongside this stone row. Up on this hilltop, stones on the slope east of the stone row appear pointed, with the points apparently pointing up at the stone row. Stones on the hilltop on the western side of the stone row possess intriguing shapes and place stones. I have often seen tri-split stones like these, usually smaller, given prominent placement among potential stone prayers. There's also a giant split rock you could walk through. Could this have some significance? Still on the north side, but closer to the pond, in October of 2023, I revisited the stone row I'd discovered on my first trip here to Gates Pond in late 2020. But it was still early fall, with still too much leafy plant life around to clearly see the stonework. Unfortunately, as this stonework grows more interesting, it also becomes more overgrown. This wing-shaped boulder seems noteworthy. Up behind this, a short way ahead, we find two large boulders linked by a small row of stones. I knew from seeing this in December 3 years earlier that it's so overgrown it's still obscured even during the winter months. This is upslope behind the stone row. Downslope, the stone row turns to the right, pointing downhill toward the wetland, as it ends in what appeared to be a compound serpent head. We're not spending too long here, there's too much more to see. And you can get a better look at this stone row on my first video on Gates Pond from my first visit. Because Hudson owns the pond, part of me always assumed it was in Hudson, but it's not. It's in Berlin. But the title of my first video here is, quote, Experiencing Stone Rows and Stone Piles at Gates Pond in Hudson, Massachusetts, end quote. Turned out that wasn't the only thing I got wrong. Unfortunately, revisiting this serpent head revealed a detail I'd missed the first time. A drill hole from a metal drill. This makes it less likely to be indigenous work or a serpent head. It's still possible. Iron tools were among the first items indigenous folks traded with Europeans to obtain. And there is plenty of other stonework nearby, which seems to be ancient indigenous work. In fact, the northwest corner of the property was said to contain an old Indian stone, a great boulder called Sleeping Rock, mentioned in the earliest deed. This picture is from Houghton's History of Berlin from 1895, mentioned earlier. I don't think I've found this rock yet, if it's still around. I did revisit the Indian stone south of the pond on my October 23 visit, King Philip Rock. King Philip was the name European settlers called Metacomet of the Wampanoag, an indigenous leader, son of Massasoit, who had welcomed the Pilgrims. Metacomet pushed back against English settlers' colonial expansion in a conflict so violent, it's still the bloodiest ever on this soil, King Philip's War, in 1675 and 76. King Philip, Metacomet, is said to have gathered his soldiers here, at this boulder, before and after battle in Lancaster and Marlborough. This was part of colonial Lancaster. Metacomet was killed in August of 1676, effectively ending the war in this area, though it did continue to the north for a couple more years. Still a lot of leaves on these trees in early October. If you'd like to see the boulder more clearly and learn more about it, check out the Experiencing King Philip Rock in Berlin, Massachusetts video from a late December visit in 2021. I also visited this stone row on the western side of the pond on that December 2021 trip, but because I focused the video on King Philip Rock, this really hasn't been shared in a video presentation before. There is intriguing stonework all around this pond, but I still haven't explored much of the western side. And I didn't shoot more on this trip because I was heading to the Big Boulder. This stonework on the pond's southeast side is what I saw after visiting King Philip Rock, on my way back up around the pond. Some refer to this construction as a lace stone wall, but I see them more as niches in a stone row. Someone had freshly defaced this perched boulder back when this was shot in December 2021. It has been cleaned up a bit since then, thankfully. There may be old, eroded wing or fin-shaped stonework along this low outcrop. There's certainly more and larger and clearer examples further to the north and east of here, nearby. There is a lot of area to explore around Gates Pond. Each time I visit, I see something new to me that could be potentially ancient and indigenous in origin. With revisiting King Philip Rock and the Serpent Row, with a hole in its head, on that October 2023 trip, I decided to head out on the woodland path to the northeast of the pond in search of something new, or new to me. And I was not disappointed. After crossing the Fuzzgate Brook Waterworks seen earlier, I came across this stone row running up to the safety fence around nearby I-495. I like that they just ran the fence through the stone row and didn't destroy it too much. This stone row is full of underlying coursework, more organic than European in nature. The top occasionally seems deliberately flattened, as if later settlers fixed an undulating indigenous stone row. The stone row kind of curls back on itself here in the coursework. Could this be a compound serpent's head with an egg in its jaws? The stone row appears to feature serpent form after serpent form, often overlapping. This niche is striking, isn't it? This is how it looked when I first saw it in early October 2023. It's striking how the sun comes through the niche. And this was about a week and a half after the autumnal equinox. So I used Sunseeker and saw there was the potential for an alignment, though I didn't see any telltale stone marker on the horizon sightline. The light green line on the left marks the equinox sunrise, and the light blue line is the winter solstice sunrise path. This triangular stone stands out. Let's look at this from the other side. Our stone row walk along continues to what may be some compound serpent heads. Let's look at the coursework on these arching sections that remain. Is this a wing-shaped stone or a serpent's head looking left? With these compound forms, the intention is clear, but what it is intended to portray isn't necessarily evident any longer. Can't always be sure if we're looking at serpent heads or tails when we find these compound forms, though we do still find the suggestion of indigenous serpent iconography. The stone road diminishes some, but continues on. We see an intersecting stone road to our left, which presents some very interesting undulations. We'll come back to keep walking along this stone row, but this new one is worth checking out. You can tell the difference in lighting and leafiness when I show any footage from my first sighting of this stone row in October of 2023. I returned twice this year, in early spring and late fall, to try to capture better footage and photos. This surrounded stone, or arch in the stone row, is pretty spectacular stonework. This isn't thrown together or field clearing. This could be indigenous stonework. Let's look at the other side. Back to the arch so we can see this side of the stone row. When we follow this stone row, it becomes highly degraded, but it does continue. When we follow what remains of this stone row through the brush and down trees, the intact segments of the stone row also show possible signs of indigenous stonework. Another triangular stone. And this feature from the other side. When we follow the stone row to its next break, it ends in a flat serpent head like boulder. The coursework leading up to the boulder is also intriguing and may represent fins or wings coming off the body of the serpent row. The hiking trail, which had wandered away from the stone row, comes back around here and crosses it at this break. The stone row picks back up and heads uphill to the safety fence for 495 once again. Once again, this is not traditional European or farming stonework, though it was likely adapted and used on the farm later on. There is a perched boulder over on that ridge. We'll come back to that. But first, we'll get back to the stone row we were following before this intersecting one. Taking the hiking trail back instead of bushwhacking back along the stone row. This arch is something. Back at the intersection, we'll see what lies ahead as we pick up this stone row again. There is a fire ring next to the stone row. Continuing along the stone row, a square stone down by the wetlands on the right caught my eye. It's square on this side, but narrows down to a point on its left side in front, perhaps pointing to the wetland. It looks like this was once part of a stone row that went down into the wetland. It's now wiped out in spots, but if we follow the line of the possible old stone row back up to the still existing one, we see that beyond the stone row, there are more stones in a concentrated line. The remains of a highly degraded intersecting stone row. Unlike the other intersecting one, this one went down to the water. Now, maybe the other one used to as well, but that part is now gone. The same way so much of this stone row is now missing. On a hunch these were the remains of an ancient indigenous stone row, I decided to follow it up the hill to see where it led. And it led to some very interesting things. After the stone row seems to finally quit entirely, a low boulder rose on its path. It seems to have been shaped by human hands. It looks like the front has been shaped to represent perhaps a fish, or maybe a turtle. The stone does seem shaped to suggest a zoomorphic form. There's a rocky ridge up the hill just ahead. I believe we're looking at the remnants of great serpent stonework embellishments along this ridge. Large-scale great serpent stonework, where stones were added and the ridge shaped to suggest an emerging serpent's form rising up out of the ground, out of the underworld. This area just ahead looks collapsed, though there is still a perched, wing-shaped stone standing up. I felt my attention drawn to the right. This flattened stone seems perched perpendicular to the ridge. It could be a fin coming off the side of the great serpent. Spying what looked like a niche, I discovered it was actually the supporting stone for a grooved and perched, wing-shaped stone. This stone is quite remarkable. This groove appears deliberately excised to accentuate the wing or fin shape of this stone. And it is most definitely perched in place. As I studied this structure, I also began to wonder, well, what's on top of this ridge then? Heading up and around to get on top of the ridge, we can look back at the curve of the ridge, at the potential body of the emerging great serpent. I began wandering around the area on top of the ridge, looking for possible stonework, and got pretty excited when I spied some in the distance. Only to discover it's a fireplace. I recalled how this area was a favorite of, quote, pleasure seekers and picnic parties in the summer season, according to the Reverend Houghton's History of Berlin, and imagined some 19th century revelers roughing it here by the pond. It did look like it could have once been a cairn-like structure. Maybe older work was repurposed into this. Wandering on, I came across a stone feature I wasn't sure was a feature, until I looked closer. Then it appeared to be an arrow, and when I checked the compass, it was basically pointing east. Doubts I had about this being deliberate construction were disappearing. And there was also an elongated wing-shaped stone perched on a pile of rocks next to it. This certainly seems deliberate, though to what end, I don't know. I checked the area on the other side of the arrow, but there was no sign of corresponding stonework on that side. I spent a while wandering, looking at many potential remnants of some things spread out across the hilltop. But the most intriguing stone feature up here could be the perched boulder mentioned earlier, to the north. Circling back toward the first intersecting stone row brought me to the prominent boulder nearby. It looks like different things from different angles, possibly a shape-shifting effigy form. It appears to be a head from this angle, perhaps a serpent head. From this angle, I see, potentially, a fox's head as well. When we come around to the downslope side of this stone, a nub protruding from the front gives the stone the appearance of a turtle. It does look a lot like a turtle sitting up there, doesn't it? Thank you for taking a look at all this stonework, possible stonework, and potentially indigenous stonework I've been finding around Gates Pond, Kequasagansett. I've only given you a glimpse at some of what's here, and I know I still haven't seen everything. There's one more stone row to check out, which I found back in March. Talk about hiding in plain sight. Its degraded remnants are crossed by the northeastern woodland trail shortly after it begins, and it heads north and turns a corner, heading towards the parking area, where it becomes obvious the WPA or CCC folks who built the modern stonework simply used what was already laying in front of them. This section closest to the trail is down to just small boulders, curiously shaped stones, to be sure. I'm thinking they grabbed the smaller stones from here to build the CCC WPA stonework by the park entrance. Looks like a couple of low niches here. I haven't followed this stone row that juts out to the side just yet. The stone row does pick up for a curious corner section, with a niche of its own, and a possible protruding great serpent horn, or turtle head. This is the niche right on the corner. It's not as evident on this side. We'll get a better look once we get inside of the stone row. This could be a serpent's horn, rising off the great serpent of stone. Or maybe it's a turtle's head, rising up. There's a break here and some intriguing boulder shapes. And we're very close to the parking area. You can see how the old stone row lines up with the more modern work. Coming around to the other side, the inside it seems like. Here in the corner, you can really see the niche in the stone row. Heading back. Once again, we're down to curiously shaped boulders as we near the woodland trail. Some of these boulders do possess intriguing shapes. Another curiously shaped boulder. So here we end at the beginning, or at least the entrance to the park. You can see how the modern stonework kind of cannibalized the older work. There's the break we were standing at down there, looking up here. If you've made it this far, thank you for taking the time to consider the possibly more ancient origins to what many casually dismiss as old stone walls and such. If you'd like to learn more about the possibly ancient stonework we find all around us, check out more videos on this YouTube channel. Join our Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England Facebook group. Read my Ancient Stone Mysteries Substack. Or pick up my book, Ancient Stone Mysteries of New England, available everywhere. Learn more at ancientstonemysteries.com. I'm Mike Luoma. Thank you for joining me in rediscovering Kequasagansett.